Branson, Missouri should never have become famous. It sits in the second least populated corner of the Ozarks, 90 minutes from any real city, in a county named after the Supreme Court justice who wrote the Dred Scott decision. The land was so poor that farmers logged it bare and then walked away from it. The county's biggest claim to fame in the 1880s was a masked gang that hanged people. By every measure of geography and luck, this was the last place in America that should have grown into an entertainment capital, drawing 7 million visitors a year, more than the population of most states. And yet by the 1990s, Roy Clark, Andy Williams, and the Osmonds were performing there nightly. Tour buses backed up for miles on a 2-lane road, and a small Ozark town had somehow out-theatered Broadway. Then the whole thing began to unwind almost as strangely as it came together. The stars left, the theaters emptied, the buses thinned out. What Branson has left, and what it lost, is a story about how American entertainment actually works. And it begins with a book, a cave, and a dam that were never supposed to matter. Start with the land, because the land explains almost everything that came after. The White River Hills of southwest Missouri were never good farm country. The soil was thin, the terrain was steep, and the growing season was short. When settlers arrived in the early 19th century on land opened up by treaties that pushed the Osage west, they found a place that punished agriculture. Men cleared timber, planted what they could, and watched the rain carry the topsoil down the slopes. Taney County, where Branson would eventually sit, was named for Roger B. Taney, the 5th Chief Justice of the United States, the man who authored the 1857 opinion declaring that black Americans could never be citizens. The county carried that name into a future its namesake could not have imagined, one built almost entirely on welcoming strangers. During the Civil War, the region emptied out. Taney County's population fell from around 3,500 before the war to fewer than 1,000 by the time it ended, as families fled the bushwhacking, the raids, and the settling of old scores that turned neighbor against neighbor. Peace did not follow the surrender. Confederate veterans came home to find their farms occupied by Union men and their voting rights stripped by a new state constitution. Some of them, shut out of land and government, drifted toward crime, usually targeting the wealthier Union newcomers. The bitterness sat in the hills and waited. What that bitterness produced was one of the ugliest chapters in Missouri history, and one that Branson would later turn into a comedy act. In early 1885, a Union Army veteran named Nathaniel Kinney had settled on a ranch in Taney County and grown disgusted with the lawlessness around him. Newspapers of the era claimed that 30 or 40 murders had been committed in the county over the previous 2 decades without a single conviction, because the local courts were often run by men connected by blood or politics to the accused. On April 5, 1885, Kinney gathered around 100 men on a treeless ridge called Snap's Bald near Kirbyville and delivered a speech over the bloody shirt of a murdered man. They voted him their leader. Because they met on the barren hilltops the locals called Bald Knobs, where no one could sneak up on their meetings, they became the Bald Knobbers. 10 days after that first gathering, they broke into the Taney County Jail, seized 2 brothers named Frank and Tubal Taylor, and hanged them. The group did not stay small, and it did not stay in one county. Over the next several years, the Bald Knobbers spread into Christian and Douglas counties, where new chapters took on a darker character than Kinney's original band. The Taney County men had mostly ridden with bandanas over their faces, keeping a thin veneer of respectability, since many of them were businessmen and reformers who framed their work as a war between civilization and barbarism. The Christian County chapter went further, adopting black hoods with painted horns and grotesque faces, the masks that would become the group's lasting image. They whipped people they judged immoral. They tossed bundles of switches onto porches as warnings to reform or leave the county. They ran families off their land, and they killed. Their targets were almost entirely other poor white settlers, since the region had few black residents, and the fight was really about who would control the hills and their future. Opposition organized against them, a countergroup calling itself the Anti-Bald Knobbers, and for a few years the old Civil War divisions replayed themselves in miniature across the Ozark hollows. By the end of the 1880s, the state had finally broken the movement, hanging several of its Christian County members after a botched raid ended in murder. The masks lived on, later immortalized in the 1919 film version of The Shepherd of the Hills, and eventually stamped onto the marquee of a comedy show. Around the same time those masked riders were terrorizing the hills, a far less violent kind of man was setting up shop nearby. Reuben Branson opened a general store and post office along the future site of Lake Taneycomo in 1882, and the settlement that grew up around his counter took his name. For years it was almost nothing, a scattering of homes where the main industry, believe it or not, was canning tomatoes. The town of Branson would not officially incorporate until 1912. Nothing about the place suggested a future in entertainment. It was a poor hill settlement in a poor hill county, the kind of spot that most of America drove past on the way to somewhere else, if any road even brought them close. The railroad was creeping into the region, which would matter enormously, but on its own, a rail line only meant that timber and tomatoes could leave a little faster. The thing that changed Branson's fate was not a road or a railroad or a mine. It was a sickly preacher with a notebook and a doctor's order to find cleaner air. Harold Bell Wright was not from the Ozarks, and he was barely a preacher when he first arrived. He had come to Missouri in the 1890s and stumbled into the ministry almost by accident, filling in one Sunday when the scheduled preacher failed to show, on the strength of seeming, as the story goes, like an educated fellow. He was a minister with weak lungs, and starting in 1898, his physician sent him south twice a year to escape the climate that was slowly killing him. Wright spent his sabbaticals camping in the White River Hills, on and near the spot where a family named Ross lived, getting to know the hard-scrabble farmers who scratched a living out of the same soil that had defeated everyone before them. He filled notebooks with their speech, their feuds, and their stubborn dignity. In 1907, those notes became a novel called The Shepherd of the Hills, a melodrama of mountain folklore and forgiveness set in the exact hollows where Wright had camped, populated by characters drawn from the real people he had met. Critics did not think much of it. Readers thought the world of it. By early 1918, the book had sold 2 million copies, and it eventually claimed a place among the most widely read novels in American publishing history, translated into 7 languages and turned into 4 Hollywood films, including John Wayne's first movie shot in color. Wright had accidentally written something more powerful than a bestseller. He had written a travel brochure for a place that had never wanted tourists. Because the readers came, and that was the part nobody saw coming. People finished the book and decided they had to see the real hills where old Matt and Sammy Lane and the shepherd had lived. Never mind that those characters were mostly invented and the plot mostly imagined. Sightseers began pouring into the area around 1907, arriving by wagon and by the Missouri Pacific Railroad that was pushing into the region at almost the same moment, as if the tracks and the novel had conspired to arrive together. They knocked on the doors of actual farmhouses and asked to meet people from a story. The family living in what tourists decided was the Jim Lane cabin found strangers constantly at their door asking for things, and one of the most common souvenir requests was a rock pried loose from the fireplace to carry home. Residents who had wanted nothing but to be left alone in their hollow found themselves besieged by fans of a book. A work of fiction had turned a private, isolated community into a destination, and it happened before Branson had a single theater, hotel, or paved street to receive the crowds. The habit of visiting took hold so deeply that in 1960, an outdoor drama based on the novel began performing on the old homestead, and it ran there for more than 50 years, one of the longest-running outdoor plays in the country. The tourism came first. Everything Branson later became was built on top of a habit of visiting that a dying man's melodrama had planted decades earlier. The next accident came from water. In 1913, a power company finished the Power Site Dam near Forsyth, capturing the White River and creating a long, warm reservoir called Lake Taneycomo, the name a compression of Taney County, Missouri. It was the first hydroelectric dam in the state, and it turned the area into a modest resort. Through the 1920s and 1930s, tourists came to Taneycomo and to the nearby town of Rockaway Beach to swim, water ski, ride bumper cars, play skee-ball, and fish its warm waters, and lodges and lakefront cabins sprang up along the shore to house them. A local promoter named Jim Owen built a business running John boat float trips down the White River, guiding fishermen through the hills for days at a stretch, and he understood publicity as well as he understood the river. When Life magazine featured one of Owen's float trips in its June 1941 issue, it put the Ozark float fishing experience in front of a national audience and stamped Branson onto the mental map of American sportsmen. The town was becoming known, slowly, as a place you went to get away, to sit by the water and let the hills do the rest. The lake gave the town a second reason to exist beyond a novel. What no one realized was that the water was about to change character completely, and in doing so, hand Branson a world-class fishery by pure accident. That accident was Table Rock Dam. The Army Corps of Engineers built it 22 miles upstream for flood control, completing the earthen structure in August 1958 and bringing its generators online the following May. The dam created Table Rock Lake, a sprawling recreational reservoir that became a boating and bass fishing destination in its own right, ringed by marinas and resorts. But it also changed the water flowing into Lake Taneycomo downstream, and here the physics did something no one had planned for. Table Rock released its water from deep beneath its own surface, and that deep water came out cold, dropping Taneycomo's temperature almost overnight and converting a warm swimming lake into a frigid one. Swimmers left, trout arrived. The Missouri Department of Conservation had already built the Shepherd of the Hills trout hatchery at the foot of the dam in 1957 in anticipation of the change, and the newly cold Taneycomo became one of the finest rainbow and brown trout fisheries in the country, producing state records and drawing anglers year-round. Nobody set out to build a trout mecca. The Corps wanted flood control, the power company wanted electricity, and the fishery fell out of the equation as a side effect of releasing cold water through a turbine. Branson now had a novel, 2 lakes, and cold water full of trophy fish, and it still had not sold a single theater ticket. While the dams were reshaping the water, a family from Chicago was reshaping the ground above it. Beneath a hill west of Branson sat a cave the Osage had once called the Devil's Den, a hole so deep and dark that legend said a bear hunter had fought a bear on its edge, fallen in, and never been seen again. Spanish explorers were said to have entered it in 1541, hunting for riches and a fountain of youth, and finding neither. A Canadian entrepreneur named William Henry Lynch bought the cave in the 1880s and opened it to tourists in 1894, so committed to the venture that he cut brush and cleared what would become Missouri Highway 76 just to get visitors to his door. After the marble he hoped to mine turned out to be a fantasy, The cave took the name Marvel Cave, and for decades, Lynch and then his daughters ran tours down into its enormous chambers. In 1950, a Danish immigrant named Hugo Herschend, who sold vacuum cleaners door to door out of Chicago, vacationed in the Ozarks with his wife Mary and their teenage sons Jack and Pete, fell for the cave, and signed a 99-year lease to run it. That first summer, Marvel Cave drew 8,000 visitors. Hugo suffered a heart attack and died in 1955, but Mary and the boys kept going, sinking a decade of hard labor into the cave, pouring concrete walkways, stringing electric lights, and installing a cable train in 1958 to haul tired tourists back up out of the depths. Business jumped 40% the year the train went in, the family's first profitable year. The bigger idea was still coming. The bigger idea walked in the door in the form of an 80-year-old traveling salesman named Charlie Sullivan, who told the Herschends he had been born in a vanished mining town called Marmaros that once stood at the cave's entrance. He led them to the old building foundations hidden under leaves and brush, describing a place that had once held a hotel, a school, a pottery shop, and a couple dozen residents. The family decided to rebuild that lost 1880s village on top of the cave, and in 1960 they opened it as Silver Dollar City, an Ozark mountain town where craftsmen demonstrated blacksmithing, glass blowing, and other frontier trades for visitors waiting to tour the cave below. Mary Herschend insisted on authenticity, refusing cheap storefronts and demanding they save the trees. The park drew 125,000 people in its first year, a staggering number for a theme park built around the mouth of a cave in rural Missouri. Then it got a gift no marketing budget could buy. In 1967, the Beverly Hillbillies, one of the most watched programs in the country, filmed 5 episodes at Silver Dollar City, beaming the park and its Ozark charm into millions of American living rooms week after week. The theme park built on top of a cave had become a national attraction, and it did more than any single thing to teach American families that Branson was a place you loaded the kids into the car and drove to. Now the pieces were finally in place for music, and here the timeline circles back to those masked killers in the hills. In 1959, 4 brothers named Bill, Jim, Lyle, and Bob Mabe began performing twice a week in a converted building on the Lake Tanicomo waterfront, mixing popular country songs with Ozark mountain tunes and cornball comedy for whatever audience they could round up. They needed a name with local flavor, and they reached for the most famous thing their county had ever produced. They called themselves the Bald Knobbers. The first live music show in the history of what would become the live music capital of the world took its name from a vigilante lynch mob, and the audiences who lined up to laugh at men in floppy hats and bib overalls mostly had no idea they were watching an act named after night riders who had dragged men out of jail and hanged them from trees 70 years earlier. The irony was total, and almost nobody in the seats knew it. The show worked anyway. It gave locals and the growing stream of lake tourists something to do after dark, and it proved that Ozark music and hillbilly comedy could reliably put people in seats and keep them there. The show that pointed toward the future came in 1967, the same year the Beverly Hillbillies cameras were rolling at Silver Dollar City. A local family called the Presleys, no relation to Elvis, opened Presley's Country Jubilee, and they built their theater directly on Highway 76, the 2-lane road running west out of town toward the theme park. That decision mattered more than anyone knew at the time. The Presleys were the first act to plant a permanent theater on what would become the Strip, the corridor that every future star would eventually fight to build on. For years, the Baldknobbers and the Presleys had the road mostly to themselves. Two homegrown family shows entertaining the bus tours and the lake crowds with country, gospel, and comedy passed down through the generations of a single family. The regional music scene had deeper roots, too, and they ran through television. Back in 1954, country star Red Foley, a singer credited with dozens of top 10 hits, had moved to nearby Springfield to host the Ozark Jubilee, one of the first successful network television programs built around country music. Broadcast nationally from Springfield, just up the road from Branson, the Jubilee put Ozark performers in front of a coast-to-coast audience through the mid and late 1950s and helped establish southwest Missouri as a place where country music belonged, not merely a place where it happened to be played. The show wired the region's sound into the national imagination years before Branson had a strip to sell. By the time the May brothers and the Presleys set up their shows, the surrounding country had already spent a generation building a reputation for hill music, float trips, cave tours, and family vacations. The ingredients had been simmering across the region for decades. What Branson still needed was a single spark hot enough to turn a couple of homegrown family shows into a full-blown national gold rush. And it would arrive wearing a familiar television face. The spark was a famous name willing to bet on the town. In 1983, country music star Roy Clark, the grinning virtuoso from the television show Hee Haw, opened the Roy Clark Celebrity Theater in Branson, becoming the first nationally known performer to attach his name to a venue there. Then in 1987, a country singer named Boxcar Willie became the first celebrity to buy a theater outright and commit to performing on a permanent basis, moving to town and playing a regular nightly schedule. That was the model that changed everything about how Branson worked. A famous performer no longer had to tour to a different city every night, wearing himself out on the road for decades. He could build a single theater in one place and let the audience come to him by the busload, playing the same stage year after year to fans who traveled from all over the country to sit in his seats. Word spread through the aging ranks of country and pop performers whose touring days were winding down, and Branson started to look like the perfect soft landing, a way to keep performing and keep earning without the grind of the highway. Between 1987 and 1992, the number of performers in town exploded, and a construction boom of large and small theaters, motels, restaurants, and gift shops stretched westward along Highway 76. Then came the 11 minutes of national television that lit the fuse under all of it. In late 1991, the CBS News program 60 Minutes aired a two-part segment on Branson, and correspondent Morley Safer called it the live music capital of the world, describing the town as sitting in the buckle of the Bible Belt. The segment featured Mel Tillis and the Presley family, and its reach was enormous, dropping Branson into the living rooms of an entire nation of potential visitors on a Sunday night. By the time it aired, 22 theaters already lined Highway 76, but Safer's blessing turned a steady boom into a stampede. Stars raced to claim their piece of the strip. Mickey Gilley, Mel Tillis, Ray Stevens, Jim Stafford, and Mo Bandy all opened their own theaters in 1990 and 1991. A Japanese violinist named Soji Tabuchi, who had come to America with $500 and a fiddle after seeing Roy Acuff play a concert in Osaka, built a theater whose bathrooms became legendary, so lavish, with onyx sinks, orchids, and a mahogany billiard table in the men's lounge, that the Travel Channel featured them on a program about extreme restrooms. In 1992, Andy Williams opened the 2,000-seat Moon River Theater, the first non-country star to build in town, and the first Branson theater ever profiled in Architectural Digest. The dam had broken, and what poured through it was money. For roughly a decade, Branson ran hotter than anyone in the Ozarks could have dreamed. The Osmonds came. So did Tony Orlando, Bobby Vinton, Wayne Newton, Glenn Campbell, the Lennon sisters, and the Russian comedian Yakov Smirnoff, whose whole act was built on marveling at America. In 1992, the Hershen family, flush from Silver Dollar City, opened the 4,000-seat Grand Palace, a $13 million theater twice the size of anything else in town, and openly hoped to lure a national country music award show onto its stage. At the peak, Branson's Highway 76 held more theater seats than Broadway, packed into a town whose year-round population barely cleared a few thousand people. More than 5.5 million visitors a year rolled in, most of them retirees arriving on chartered buses who came to shake hands with the stars and take photographs in the lobby after the show. The two-lane strip choked with traffic for hours at a stretch, a river of brake lights winding through the hills. Branson had more live country music than Nashville, and it drew roughly 2 million more annual visitors than the Grand Canyon. A poor hill town named after the author of the Dred Scott decision, first made famous by a novel and a cave and a dam, had become one of the most improbable entertainment capitals on Earth. The mechanics of that boom were as unusual as the town itself. Branson did not run on album sales or radio play or a young crowd chasing the newest sound. It ran on motor coaches. Tour operators across the Midwest and South built entire multi-day packages around the Strip, loading buses with retirees for a run of shows, a meal, a stop at Silver Dollar City, and a night in one of the thousands of motel rooms that had gone up to house them. A single day in Branson at the peak might mean a breakfast show, a matinee, and an evening performance, with different theaters running 2 and 3 shows apiece to feed the demand. The stars leaned into it, standing in their lobbies after every show to sign autographs and pose for photographs, because the personal handshake was half the product. Hearing a familiar voice was only part of the draw. Fans wanted to meet the person behind the hits they had carried since childhood, and Branson sold that intimacy at a scale no arena tour could match. The town's whole economy, its restaurants, its outlet malls, its lodging, its gift shops full of Ozark crafts, was wired to the rhythm of buses pulling in and pulling out. And almost from the moment Branson reached its peak, the ground underneath that rhythm began to shift. The problem was baked into the business model, and it had everything to do with who was sitting in those 5 million seats. Branson's audience was built on the tour bus trade, and the tour bus trade ran on an aging generation who had grown up on the specific country and pop stars headlining the Strip. Those fans were the beating heart of the whole operation, and they were getting older every year. The stars were aging right alongside them, drawing crowds who remembered their hits from the radio decades earlier. As one longtime Branson observer put it with brutal plainness, the bus tours full of loyal older fans eventually and literally began to die off, and the younger travelers who might have replaced them had not grown up on Boxcar Willie, Bobby Vinton, and the Lennon sisters. The town's identity was also its trap. Everything that made Branson wholesome and beloved, its devotion to a particular slice of mid-century American entertainment, tied its fortunes to performers and a fan base that could not, by simple arithmetic, last forever. The theaters had been full because one specific audience loved one specific kind of star. As that audience thinned, the math that had built the Strip started to run in reverse. The stars began switching off their marquees one at a time. Andy Williams performed for years, but eventually ended his long run, as did Tony Orlando. Jim Stafford, whose red guitar-neck neon sign had been one of the Strip's most photographed images, refinanced his large theater in 2014 and then walked away from it, letting the bank take it back. Yakov Smirnoff, the last big out-of-town celebrity still standing, cut his schedule from 8 shows a week in the glory days down to 3, and performed his final regular show in December 2015. After that, Branson had no out-of-town celebrities left performing in their own theaters, a stunning reversal for a place that had recently held more of them than any town its size in America. The Grand Palace, the 4,000-seat crown jewel of the boom, shut its doors in 2008 and sat empty and rotting for years, its wood eventually ruined by black mold. In 2019, developers invited the local news to watch as construction crews tore the face off the building around noon to make room for an aquarium and a boardwalk. The largest theater Branson ever built came down in front of television cameras, a slow-motion collapse that took 11 years to travel from its last full house to a pile of rubble. Vandals spray-painted the shells of other abandoned theaters, and photographers wandered the deserted timeshare developments scattered through the hills. Branson did not die, though, and that is the part that complicates the easy story of a fall. The town saw the trouble coming and worked to change what it was before the change was forced on it. In 2004, the city broke ground on Branson Landing, a $420 million waterfront development along Lake Taneycomo, financed by the largest tax increment financing project in Missouri history. It opened in 2006, with more than 100 shops, restaurants, a marina, and a choreographed fountain show, and it drew a younger, broader crowd than the celebrity theaters ever had, surpassing 1 million visitors within its first 2 months. The homegrown institutions that started it all kept running: the Baldknobbers and Presley's Country Jubilee. The 2 family shows that predated the entire celebrity boom still perform to this day, having outlasted nearly every famous name that ever came and went on the Strip. Silver Dollar City, the theme park the Hershans built on top of a cave, remains one of the most popular attractions in the region and still draws millions through its gates. Dolly Parton's dinner show packs a barn every night, and the town still pulls somewhere between 7 and 10 million visitors a year, its population having grown to around 13,000, a large and functioning tourism economy, even without a single national headliner left on Highway 76. What Branson lost was the illusion that it had ever truly been a star's town, a rival to Nashville built on famous names and lights. It was never really that, or not for long. The famous names were the briefest chapter in the whole story, a decade-long spike sitting on top of a much older and stranger foundation. The things that actually built Branson and kept it alive were the accidents that no celebrity ever controlled. A dying novelist's melodrama taught Americans to visit these particular hills. A pair of dams gave the town 2 lakes and a cold water fishery no one designed. A vacuum salesman's cave became a theme park that taught families the place was safe and worth the drive. Local families with cornball comedy acts, named without irony after a lynch mob, gave the town its first stages. The stars showed up late to a party that had been running for 80 years, cashed in on that long head start, and left when their audience aged out from under them, and the town they left behind was strong enough to survive their departure. The dark marquees along Highway 76 looked like the end, and for the celebrity era, they were. But the deeper machine, the one assembled by accident over more than a century, kept right on running long after the last big name switched off his lights and drove home. I want to say thank you for watching this whole video. It really does mean a lot to me. If you'd like to watch another one of my videos, there's one on the screen right now that I think you'll enjoy. And if you've got a second, I'd love your help getting to 1,000 subscribers, since I don't see a dime of ad revenue until we hit that number, and every single sub gets me closer.